Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the District of Squamish's Circular Economy Roadmap Stakeholder Workshop. My name is Paul Shorthouse. I'm a Senior Director with the Delphi Group and Managing Director of Circular Economy Leadership Canada. Great to have you all joining us today. I've been working in close collaboration with the District of Squamish over the last couple of months in the planning for this virtual workshop, and I'll be your host and lead facilitator for today's session. I'd suggest just for the first portion of the event here that you please mute your lines and turn off your cameras for the next little while until we get to the breakout portion of the workshop. But to kick things off, a very warm welcome again to everybody on the line. We had more than 70 people register for this interactive workshop and are really delighted to have you join us today. We're also very happy to have Mayor Elliott from the District of Squamish and a number of district councillors joining us today, as well as Jordan Sturdy, an MLA for West Vancouver Sea to Sky. And just as people are joining us and filtering into the room, I'd like to invite you to put your names and organizations into the chat box. Be great to see who's on the line here, get your fingers warmed up. And I'd now like to invite Mayor Karen Elliott from the District of Squamish to share a few welcome remarks to help us kick things off. So over to you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you to you and your team for helping us get this organized today. And on behalf of the District of Squamish, I just want to express our excitement about this workshop today and how excited we are to have Tima here as our keynote a day after the expert panel on the circular economy in Canada published their report, Turning Point. I am joining you all from the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish people. I'm so fortunate to live and work in this beautiful valley, and I acknowledge my work to learn, lead, and grow in ways that honor a new and respectful relationship with the air, land, and water of this place and the people who have stewarded these natural gifts since time immemorial. And I hope that you will take a moment now to acknowledge the territory on which you find yourself today. 3 years ago, our new council put in place a strategic plan that would guide our actions for our 4-year term. Climate and the environment is the first pillar, followed by affordable housing, the economy and local jobs, and then community connectivity. They are all interconnected and interdependent, but our work on climate underpins and influences them all. In July 2019, our council passed a climate emergency resolution. We knew our council term was the one that needed to shift the trajectory of our GHG emissions and align community priorities with the long-term sustainability and climate goals that we have, that our youth have. And so it has influenced all reports that come to council now. The climate emergency resolution now influences all decision-making, but it set in motion 2 very specific plans of action. It helped us create our community climate action plan. And the first big move out of that plan is closing the loop on waste, which Ian Pickett's from the district will talk more about. And it also kickstarted our emerging sector roadmap and action plan that works to develop our green economy. And again, Kate Mulligan, who is here from our economic development team, will be speaking to that today. Today, we'll have a chance to discuss our draft circular economy roadmap, which is linked to both of these plans and our aspirations for a healthy planet and a healthy future. Squamish enjoys punching above our weight. We may be small, but we are a community full of innovators, entrepreneurs, and people who care deeply about this place and our place in the world. At every step of this plan, we are engaging with others, soliciting feedback, and improving our shared understanding to create conditions for success. These are challenging times, and more perspectives and diverse experience and expertise at the table will help us design a circular economy for Squamish. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here with us, and I look forward to some very interesting and fruitful discussion. So I'll now pass it back to Paul Shorthouse to get us started.
Thank you very much, Mayor. That was a very warm welcome. And before we start to provide a bit more context setting introductions from the Squamish team, I thought it'd be great to know a little bit more about our participants who are on the line today for today's workshop. And so if I could ask Victoria and the Globe team to bring up a couple of our quick polling questions here. We'd really like to hear a bit more from the audience in terms of the organization you work for, firstly. And if you scroll down to the bottom of that question, you'll see the second question, which is, how familiar are you with the term circular economy and the related opportunities, just so we can kind of get a sense of the audience here. Be a great opportunity to both share best practices and learn from each other today. So while people are completing the polls, we'll bring the results back in a moment. But for now, I'd like to invite Kate Mulligan, Economic Development Officer, and Ian Picketts, Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change at the District of Squamish, to share a few context setting remarks, some background context on Squamish's circular economy roadmap process and where we're at today. So Kate, over to you.
To see the interest that's generated from this topic. I'm going to provide a very quick overview of how the circular economy fits into the district's economic goals, which include creating local employment for our resident workforce and increasing the concentration of priority target sector firms within the district. So if you could go to the next slide. In 2018, the district set out to identify potential sectors to strengthen and develop. And following this year-long discovery process, the district endorsed its sector ecosystem consisting of core, enabling, and emerging sectors. Core sectors are identified as sector competency areas where there is a significant number of local firms or employment, while enabling sectors, which may share those same characteristics, also enable key sectors to operate. Finally, two emerging areas for development evolved from this work, which were considered to be not mutually exclusive from core enabling sectors, but instead opportunities to build and strengthen clusters of innovation and businesses around. The green economy, consisting of clean tech and environmental services, craft food and beverage and agriculture, and innovative construction, wood products and forestry, encompasses activities that aim to reduce environmental risks, ameliorate ecological scarcities, and support sustainable development without degrading the environment. While our outdoor recreation theme is supported by an increasingly diverse cluster of companies, from consumer products to business services to green initiatives, what they all have in common is that they do not just sell a product, but a lifestyle, to increase awareness and engagement by using the natural resources to link into consumer trends in fitness, wellness, and environmental sustainability. Next slide. A resulting outcome of the ecosystem identification process was the development of the emerging sector the emerging sector roadmap and action plan, which sets forth a direction as well as accompanying actions to strengthen and develop Squamish's thriving and diverse emerging economy. Actions are broken into two broad categories within this plan. One which focuses on foundational cluster development strategies, including understanding composition and needs of developing clusters, while the other on foundational business and investment attraction strategies to enhance our investment readiness and undertake business development initiatives. As part of this plan in early 2021, Economic Development completed an emerging sector series to identify a vision and mission for this work, compile opportunities and specific actions to advance emerging themes, and establish a framework for the development and evaluation of actions. Next slide. As such, stakeholders selected the Donut Economics Framework. Developed by University of Oxford economist Kate Raworth, this visual framework combines the concept of planetary or Earth's ecological boundaries with the complementary concept of social boundaries. The center or the whole represents the social constructs that are required to be met for all humans, while the planetary boundaries are what life depends on to survive and must not be overshot. Kate Raworth's donut offers a vision of what it means for humanity to thrive in the 21st century. And donut economics explores the mindset and ways of thinking needed to get us there. The main goal of this new model is to reframe economic problems and set new goals. In this model, an economy is considered prosperous when all 12 social foundations are met without overshooting any of the 9 ecological ceilings. This is represented by the area between the 2 rings, considered by its creator as the safe and just space for humanity. Next slide. Finally, this brings us full circle and back to why we are here today. As part of this emerging sector series, the circular economy was identified as an exploratory project and one that was thought to help action the goals of the donut economic framework. Economic development sees the circular opportunity as vital to strengthening our diverse and thriving economic ecosystem. And now I'm going to hand it off to Ian Pickett so that he can share with you our community climate action plan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kate. So as Mayor Elliott noted, next slide, please. Actually, my name is Ian Pickett, and I'm the Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change at the District of Squamish. As Mayor Elliott noted, in 2019, Council declared a climate emergency and pledged to reduce community emissions in line with the IPCC requirements to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this means a 45% reduction by 2030 and net carbon neutrality by 2050. So the Community Climate Action Plan, or CCAP, was created to align Squamish's community emissions with these targets. Our GHG inventory in Squamish is actually quite straightforward. Generally by sector, waste accounts for 20% of our emissions, buildings 30%, and transportation approximately 50%. One thing that's very important to note for this workshop especially is that our community GHG inventory does not include Scope 3 emissions, which are primarily related to consumption and the products that we use. Scope 3 also doesn't include airline travel and upstream energy production. So although our community GHG inventory looks like the pie graph you see, it does not include all of the emissions associated with what we do. And to meet the IPCC targets, we have to get all emissions down 45% by 2030 and neutral by 2050. Next slide, please. So our CCAP outlines 6 big moves to get us to our target. Most of you are probably fairly familiar with these, but the big moves generally reflect the major sources of emissions by sector in our community. One thing that is helpful to remember is, as a municipality, there are some emissions that we have quite a bit of jurisdiction over, something like our landfill or our municipal buildings, and some emission sources that we actually have very little control over, like people's existing homes or their vehicles. So the CCAP outlines a broad array of actions ranging from partnering to educating to incentivizing to outright dictating. So there's a big range of kind of carrots and sticks and ways that we can incent emissions reductions. Next slide, please. So we do have a very long way to go to get us to 45% below 2010 levels by 2030, but there is some exciting progress that we have made. So just for context for this workshop, here are a few examples of recent actions. So our landfill gas flare was lit on November 23rd, just 3 days ago. You can see an image on the far right. And this will relate to a 75% reduction in landfill emissions. And we hope in short time to eventually put this gas to beneficial reuse. We have a lot of ongoing work related to our active transportation network. Mamquam Road is currently under construction, and the Pemberton bike improvements have just been completed, as you can see on the right. Other actions include a heat pump pilot program that we are launching in early 2022 to help people transition away from fossil fuel heating sources in their homes. We have also completed a detailed municipal energy and emissions plan to get our corporate emissions in line with that 45% target. And finally, I encourage people to check out our website. We've put a lot of work into communications, and we also have 4 new podcasts focused on climate. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Ian. Thanks for the overview, both Kate and Ian. I think it's really important to show that circular economy is really about bringing both the economic opportunities and the environmental benefits together. And that's why we're seeing both departments collaborating here across various disciplines. So with that, maybe Victoria, I can invite you to bring our polling results back so people can see where we're at. We have a lot of regional, local governments and provincial government folks. Not as many businesses as maybe we'd like to have seen, but a handful here. Education training providers, nonprofits, a few consultants. So a nice diversity anyway from that perspective. Certainly the medium-sized businesses there are incremental to Squamish's makeup, as well as the small business community. We've got a mixture of knowledge in the room as well. So about half or so are familiar with the term, and the rest are sort of a mix of experts maybe, and those that are here to learn. So thanks very much for contributing to that insight as we kick things off. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to share the objectives for today's workshop and speak a bit to the agenda. So really we're here to try and develop a bit of an understanding of what circular economy is as a model for economic prosperity and how it's relevant to the District of Squamish. Really, we're hoping to socialize through this process the very first sort of opportunity to get input on the draft circular economy roadmap from key stakeholders that are in the room here. We're looking for your input on sort of some of the activities or tactics, quick wins or medium-term areas that we should really be thinking about as part of circular economy roadmap for Squamish. And of course, this is a collaborative effort, so really understanding where workshop participants see themselves and or the ability to work obviously on next steps and implementation. So if we go to the next slide, we've broken up the day today in terms of sort of two components to help give you a chance to dive in on some content after a couple of presentations from our keynote, Tima, and a bit of context setting remarks around circular economy. We'll take a short break, and then we'll hear from a couple local businesses that are really living the circular economy principles within their own operations, and hear a little bit about that and the benefits to the community. And then we'll dive into the roadmap for a second time, a little bit of a deeper dive here, and then get your input through a second breakout session. So go through that agenda here and looking forward to your participation along the way. You'll note at the bottom that there's a chat box there, so we really welcome you to put your comments in as things evolve, and share links or other information with participants here. Also, when the speakers are presenting in the next little while, if you have questions for them, we welcome you to put your questions right into the chat box, and we'll try and direct those to the speakers afterwards. Just make sure you select all participants so we see those. And given the number of people on the line today, we'd ask that you keep your audio on mute during the plenary portions, but obviously during the workshops, we'll open those up, and looking forward to your input throughout the process here. So with no further ado, I would very much like to welcome Tima Bansal, who will provide some insights here on circular economy as a model of the future. So Tima is a professor of strategy at the Ivey Business School. She's Canada Research Chair in Business Sustainability, and she's also the Executive Director and founder of the Network for Business Sustainability, which is a growing network of more than 35,000 followers from management research and practice that are committed to advancing sustainable business. Most recently, Tima was the chair of the Canadian Council of Academies expert panel on the circular economy, which just released its results from the 1.5-year-long study that was conducted yesterday. So we're very much delighted that she's offered to join us this morning and share her perspectives on the circular economy and the opportunities for Canada based on that recent work. And she's joining us from Copenhagen right now. So thank you for making time on your Friday evening, Tima. Over to you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Mayor Elliott. And in fact, thank you all for giving me this opportunity. It's the first presentation I've given on the report that was just released yesterday. So Paul got me early, and this is fantastic to be able to broadcast out some of the findings that we have. It's, as Paul said, a year-long effort. I'm going to share my screen As a professor, I don't think I can talk without slides, so I will impose that on you. And here we go. So the title of the report is called The Turning Point. And ECCC, Environment Canada, Environment Climate Change Canada, asked us to answer the question, what are the potential opportunities and challenges for the circular economy in Canada? So that was what was guiding us. We had 16 people, 2 international stars, but people that represented academia, business, and nonprofits and government. So it was wonderful. And I know that most of you know the circular economy, and we had a good time debating what it is. But I wanted to just anchor the definition of circular economy, what it meant to us, because I think there's some points that are really important here. First is systemic. And so that means that production and consumption have to align and work within planetary boundaries, which, as Kate said, is fits within the Kate Millington and Kate Rayworth's model of donut economics. So it has to fit within planetary boundaries. I want to highlight the fact that conserves not only material resources, but energy and water. And we want to generate less waste and pollution. So we want to conserve stuff and we want to generate less bad stuff. So it's a very simple idea, but I think that this is really important and anchors us as we go forward. Some very basics. I know many of you, most of you, in fact, on this call know this, but I just want to reinforce a couple of points. We get everything from the earth. We take, make, waste it. And that, I think everybody knows. Now, what's important in the circular economy is that that we want to separate out the biological materials from the technical materials. And we often don't do that when we waste stuff. And so the biological materials, then the earth can actually regenerate for us. So let's say it's food or it's wood or whatever, and we make it into something that has some processing to it. We consume it. And what we can do is put it back in the soil and it will reappear. And it's wonderful about biological materials. The technical materials, though, require us to reuse those materials and put them back into the economy. And so the earth can't absorb them. This is plastics, this is metals, etc. And all energy needs to come from renewable resources. So that's where we want to get to. And so another way of thinking about this is that we take products, at the end of life, they become waste. Some portion of that is recycled. And that bit goes back into the product as recycled content. And the rest then becomes virgin. So you can see this cycle that you go through. So here's the circularity rate. And this is the moment of truth. What do you think the circularity rate is globally? Or sorry, let's start with the EU. The EU has a pretty good circularity rate. I don't know if you're comfortable unmuting. We might have a shy group here, but does anybody want to shout out what a circularity rate could be?
We could put guesses in the chat box.
Chat box. Okay, let's do that. Just chat box.
8%.
Put some percentages in. Sorry, I heard a voice.
15%.
15, good. EU. Any other numbers for the EU? Okay, I can't see the chat, so I'm going to try to figure out how to do this. Here we go. Okay. Worldwide, 5, 10. Oh, you guys are pessimistic. So, good. No, I mean, this is great. So hold this thought. EU is 11.7%. So now some of you are getting closer for the global rate, 8.6%. So whoever said less than 9, oh, that was you, Paul, 9% globally. It is less than 9%. Okay, here's another question. Now we estimated this number is not available for Canada. So the panel, the expert panel, put together an economic model for Canada. What do you think the circularity rate is for Canada? Let's put that into the chat now that you know these two numbers. I'm gonna wait just a few seconds, 10%, 5%, 6%. Ooh, you guys are good. Okay, 6.1% for Canada.
They read your report.
Oh, okay. It seems that way. And it's 278 pages, so good on you. Buried somewhere in there is this 6.1%. And the thing is, it's getting worse. And so it was higher I know this is the actual numbers for the European Union and globally. It was higher the previous years. So it just goes to show that we're not getting better at this, we're getting worse. So what is circularity? This is a take, make, waste part of the economy. And what we want to do with circularity, people sometimes think it's just at the end of life that we move the big circle back to recycling and recovery. But actually what we want to do is to maintain the materials in the economy for longer. And so that could be recovering byproduct. It could be at any point recovering byproducts. So if it's offcuts or it's sawdust that's used to produce energy, or methane from landfills, as Ian was telling us, that could be all recovery of byproducts. But it could be reselling or donating products. It'd be sharing economy, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing. Anything with a re in front of it is a good thing. And the smaller cycles are actually better for the economy than the larger ones. And I'm going to just get to the final reflections that the panel had rather than bore you with a lot of materials. But there's 4 points I want to raise here that the panel really thought hard about. The CE provides an opportunity for Canada to become more environmentally sustainable, socially equitable, and economically successful. The three are deeply integrated. We will never be environmentally sustainable without the circular economy, because as we move stuff from the land and we put it back into the land, air, and water as waste, we are suffocating the planet, we're suffocating ourselves. I don't need to talk about that to this group, but there's social equality that becomes important, and economic success is underlying that. I'll come back to that in just a moment. See, the circular economy is seen as aspirational, and that's really key, is that we will never get to 100%, maybe we never even want to, but we need to move towards it. And so it will require systems-wide transformative change, and it can only be advanced through collaboration. And this is really key, that we need collaboration, we need innovation, and we need better data. We don't have that. And one thing that's really cool is that if Canada really embraces a circular economy, we will lead the world in innovation, because the rest of the world is moving there. And if we move slowly, we will lose out. If we move more quickly, we will be able to gain markets that we haven't currently got. And then there's benefits for the circular economy transition, because it's aligned with a climate change policy and our zero waste policies. And this is consistent with what Mayor Elliott said were your aspirations as well in Squamish. This is going to be my last slide, I believe. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this one. So in terms of the opportunities for Canada, and I would argue opportunities for Squamish, that in the production of stuff, in the extraction and production of stuff, there's a huge amount of greenhouse gases that are generated. And as Ian also said, that there's also in landfills, there's greenhouse gases that are also created. And so through the circular economy, we will be able to better reach our net zero goals. It's the only way, in fact, to reach our net zero goals. The just transition is really key here. Right now, most extractive industries are done in remote areas, probably in around Squamish as well. And most waste is deposited in remote areas or people with lower socioeconomic classes. Once we move to circularity, what's really cool is you end up with smaller businesses, SMEs, that benefit in local regional communities. And that will move us away from this massive scale, winner takes all model, to a smaller scale, local regional economy that's resilient. And that goes to the next point, is that we will build forward better as we rebuild from COVID. We will build more resilient communities, we will build more resilient buildings, we will build more resilient businesses. And what it means for business then is new revenue streams. And so as businesses rethink the way that they do things, then they think about where they can sell byproduct, for example. So the byproduct then is not waste, it's a new revenue stream. You can reduce supply chain risk because then you're sourcing locally, you're selling your waste locally, and that builds much stronger local relationships. And then it also implements industrial symbiosis, and that means that one company's waste becomes another company's feedstock. And there's no reason to believe that we will be worse off in employment. In fact, all our modeling suggests, we had many debates on this, is that employment will be likely positive or neutral. So let me just give you an example of what this could look like. So Guelph has done a phenomenal job in terms of the circular economy, and food is one of the most fantastic areas in which we can really generate circularity, because food grows locally, and if you can put the waste back into the soil, that also regenerates. When you think about 60% of food is wasted, that's a lot of opportunity. Sorry, 40% of food is wasted in Canada. That's a lot of opportunity for generating wealth. So in Guelph, we have Wellington Brewery that has spent grain from the brewery that they can feed to the insect farm, which then uses the insects to feed to the fish farm. The fish farm then produces a fish, of course, but then the fish waste or the fish poop can go into the potato farm as fertilizer. And so then you can grow potatoes. And then the spent grain can also go to as yeast to make bread from sourdough. And what's really cool is that then you get the fish farms. So you get your fish and chips from the potato farm, and you get your beer, and you get your bread, and you've got yourself a meal that's served in a local restaurant. If that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what does. And it's really cool, because where do these ideas generate? They don't generate by some sort of matchmaking service. It's by you sitting down over beer and talking to another small business saying, you know, what waste do you have? And let's start a new business that can generate some opportunity here. That is it, I believe.
Thank you, Tima.
Paul.
Thank you for grounding us in that example, and thank you for honoring us with the first presentation on the results here. I know there's a December 3rd webinar coming up that will also go more into details on some of the results. Just in the essence of time, there's a couple questions that came into the chat box. One in particular around circularity levels for biological versus the technical loops. Do you know, Tima, if modeling was done to kind of look at the different loops there in terms of material flow in Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no, and the reason being is that we don't even have the data. The amount of data that we had was so small, and so that we had to use a lot of the modeling from the EU and then apply whatever data that we could. So we couldn't get to that level of detail.
Okay, thank you. More work to be done. Jesse had a question around the major challenges, and I know I'm going to cover that a little bit in my presentation as well. So maybe just from your perspective, the top 2 or 3 biggest issues we need to deal with.
It's a great question, Jesse. And I would say one of the obvious ones is Canada's size. And so we're huge. The circular economy really works in local, regional environments. You can see in Europe, because they're more compact, that they can do it much more effectively or easily. That's an obvious one, that Canada will have to find regional solutions, which makes it really cool for Squamish to take some leadership here. But the other one that I think is super important as well is this anchoring that we have in a natural resource extractive economy. And so in a world in which we have forest products, we have oil and gas products and minerals, that there's a lot of resistance to this, because we see a lot of businesses and even mindsets of consumers and employees that say, I don't want to deal with circularity because that will threaten my job. And maybe the third one is just the levels of government. And each level of government has a different jurisdiction of what they cover. So we need coordination with government, and we know how hard that is.
That's great. Thank you for those sort of top challenges in your mind. There's one more question from Richard, and it actually ties into your last point around the role of government and how government can support. Maybe I'll ask Tima if you don't mind just sticking around for a little bit and answering that question in the chat box. And then I'll let you get on with the rest of your Friday evening. But thank you very much for joining us. And people can download the CCA report. We'll put it in the chat box as well for people to have a closer look.
I want to thank you, Paul, and everyone else for this opportunity. I think it is really fantastic. I just want to say that for Squamish to put their head up above the parapet and say that they can do something on this, and you would really be showing leadership. So good luck. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Tima. Great. Before we dive into the roadmap itself, the draft roadmap, and hear from the Squamish team around that principle before our breakout, I am just going to also reinforce a few pieces of information as part of the circular economy to sort of ground this a little bit in the opportunities for Squamish as a whole. So starting with, hoping you can see my slide here, it's very much a huge economic opportunity, as Tina touched on, in terms of the ability to recapture the value of the materials and resources that are currently being lost. It's estimated to be a $4.5 trillion opportunity by 2030 and a $25 trillion opportunity by 2050. This is globally. So Canada, where do we fit in there? The World Economic Forum has stated a great point here that circular business models provide a competitive advantage because they create more value for every unit of resource than the traditional linear model. So we're seeing a groundswell here, efforts across all sectors of the economy, from resource extraction industries to manufacturing and construction to service-based sectors. We're seeing investments by major companies as well as small businesses and entrepreneurs that we'll hear from later today. Big companies like Google and Apple and IKEA and Unilever to more of the finance players like BlackRock. And we've seen a 10-fold increase in private market funds focused on circular economy just in the last few years. Europe has been out in front, as probably many people know. They've been investing €1 billion into research and innovation to support circular economy and competitiveness. But it's not just Europe, we're seeing it around the world, and China's just introduced it into their latest 5-year plan and are investing $500 billion into their industrial parks to make them more circular. And I wanted to ground sort of the theoretical concept a bit by sharing a bit more on the strategies that are being applied by the business sector and just give you a few examples here so you can kind of go into the breakouts with these in mind. Most of us think about number 5 there, the resource recovery or recycling side of things, but there are 4 other really well-established business models here that I thought I would just walk you through very quickly by giving a couple examples. So circular inputs into supply chains. That's the business model which uses renewable energy or bio-based materials or potentially completely recyclable materials as a key input. And Chop Valley from Vancouver is an example there where they're using old chopsticks and upcycling them into new products like furniture and other items. So a circular input. But this is another example on a whole different scale. It's the 40-story Canada Earth Tower that's designed by Perkins & Will, which is a mixed-use development and around 200 residential units. It's meant to be the world's tallest hybrid wood tower, predominantly made out of cross-laminated timber, but will really dramatically reduce GHG emissions through carbon sequestration, and also meant to be a zero emissions building, so no consumption of fossil fuels. So a couple circular principles there in terms of both renewable energy, but also renewable inputs, so long as your forests are managed properly and sustainably. The second business model are sharing platforms. So that's a model that involves increasing the usage rates of assets through collaborative models like sharing and community access. This is the Toronto tool library where members can access everything from drills to welding equipment and minimize the amount of time those materials or those equipment are sitting wasted. There's also the growth of business models in this sort of sharing space that's been enabled by digital technology platforms. And many of these examples here you'll probably recognize, from shared mobility to accommodation in workplaces to different types of services and trading platforms. The third is the product as a service. So that's the business model where a product's ownership is retained by the producer over the long term to increase its productivity. So Loop is an example that's rolling out in Canada in partnership with Loblaws. They're leasing reusable packaging to food manufacturers like Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and then the package gets returned by the consumer and it gets reused again and again. So it's about durability and non-disposable packaging, ideally that lasts much longer. But there's other examples of product as a service business model. This is the photo of a store window for H&M, where they're highlighting their clothing rental service, where customers, they claim, can own the moment rather than the outfit. So we'll see a shift towards more of those sort of models in the future, we feel. Product life extension is another one where the business model is focused on extending the lifetime of products through repair, reprocessing, upgrading, and resale. And this Retuna Mall here in Sweden is an example where everything being sold is secondhand or refurbished, and they run repair clinics on the weekends and have a maker space in the mall. So a really interesting concept there, bringing it together under one roof. You may be familiar with EU's new right to repair legislation rules that require certain electrical goods in Europe have to be repairable for at least 10 years. And the manufacturers and retailers have to make those spare parts available. And the federal government here in Canada has now recognized right to repair as part of the legislation they'd like to bring forward in the next few years. And lastly, the resource recovery, which is the recovery of usable resources at the end of a product's lifetime. This is one example, again, out of Europe, but there's examples from Canada too. It's Smurfit Kappa's recycled paper mill, which is one of the most efficient paper mills in Europe. It produces less than 1 kilogram of solid waste for every ton of paper it produces, compared to the 32 kilograms that their paper competitors produce. And really, it's an example of industrial symbiosis, where the waste from one industry is an input or a resource for another. So this company, this mill, is using no virgin wood fibers. It's relying on recovered paper and innovative byproducts from nearby farmers like tomato stems and potato starch and calcium carbonate. And they're also recovering the impurities from their industrial processes and selling them to nearby industries to generate new revenues and save on their tipping fees. And here's another example from BC. Adam Corneal, if you're familiar with him, pitched to the Dragon's Den and resulted in a full sweep for his resource recovery business model, which earned his company Unbuilders $500,000 from the investors. It's Unbuilders is focused on deconstructing homes in order to salvage the valuable old growth lumber from 1960s homes and older, instead of demolishing them and sending that really valuable material into the landfill. And just really interestingly enough, a report by the National Zero Waste Council found that 1.3 million tons of embodied carbon could be avoided every year if all the buildings that are renovated or demolished in Canada were disassembled and reused in terms of those materials. So a huge opportunity there from an environment and a jobs perspective. So I just wanted to quickly cover sort of what action we're seeing around circular economy in Canada from a policy perspective, and in BC more specifically. So Canada has been including circular economy considerations in several of its sector strategies over the last few years, including the Canada Minerals and Metals Plan and the Forest Bioeconomy Framework for Canada. And really in the last few years, the gateway into circular economy has been through their focus on plastics, which includes the launch of the Ocean Plastics Charter in 2018 at the G7 Ocean Summit in Halifax, as well as their Canada-wide strategy and action plan on zero plastic waste with the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, or the Council for, and more recently, they've completed a national strategy for remanufacturing and value retention processes, and are now integrating circular principles into their greening government strategy, which is really focused on procurement as a key driver. We saw in the Liberal platform reference to a $100 million circular economy innovation and infrastructure fund, as well as I mentioned the right to repair legislation, and most likely the legacy of Canada co-hosting the World Circular Economy Forum earlier this year, where 9,000 people participated from 150 countries, is we'll see, we hope, a national circular economy strategy or action plan or roadmap coming out soon, or being proposed. So at the local level here in BC, Clean BC's latest roadmap to 2030 identified plans for a circular economy strategy for BC in 2022. They've got their plastics action plan focused on single-use items and recycling more plastics and getting more containers back into the system, as well as they're cleaning up our shores, which was a COVID recovery program. Very good to focus on putting people back to work on cleaning up our coasts. Organics management and food prevention. are been a big focus, as well as sort of looking at the forest bioeconomy, forest management, the connection with areas like mass timber, biochar, other higher value materials, and expanding sort of regulation like extended producer responsibility. Local governments have, through the UBCM resolution, have been asking for a provincial strategy and also showing, a lot of leadership, as we're seeing here from Squamish. Private sector, obviously, and NGOs as well. So Metal Tech Alley is one example, is an initiative by the Lower Columbia Initiatives Corp in Trail, who have created sort of an innovation cluster focused on, built around the large smelter that's run by Tech, Selkirk College, and many innovative entrepreneurs and clean tech companies that are focused on battery recycling and the recovery of critical minerals and metals. Secondly, I'd say Project Zero is really interesting that they're an incubator that's working with more than 24 different startups over the last few years to help them with their circular business plans. And that's expanding around the province. And then the Share, Reuse, Repair initiative, which is moving right to repair legislation forward for BC, and also looking at sort of just and inclusive workforce opportunities in the circular economy. And so lastly, just talking on the drivers and enablers, which are really a response to the systemic barriers that we need to focus on and shifting away from the current linear status quo. So 4 key drivers and underlying enablers that I just wanted to quickly touch on. The first is partnerships and collaboration. So we really need to come together to address sort of the siloed nature and look at cross-sector collaboration. We have to think about awareness building and the opportunities to grow the market demand for circular products and services through education, as well as the underlying metrics and information or data that we need to make informed decisions and policy. And that ties to the second point here. We need to better harmonize our policy efforts and use policy to drive circular economy through regulation or incentives or economic instruments, and leverage procurement as purchasing power. Innovation, so that's innovation more so than just technology, but also in system and process innovation, product design, business model innovation, supply chain, and social and policy innovation. And lastly, investment. So we need to make sure we have the financing mechanisms in place to support businesses and scale up, but also the infrastructure. So areas, everything from recycling to remanufacturing to reuse and repair to the information communication technologies that support sort of the digital backend, and renewable energy as an input, and green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to help regenerate natural capital. So that kind of sets us up really to go a little bit deeper on the roadmap itself, and would like to invite Jen from the District of Squamish to profile for everybody here a high level what's in the roadmap and where things are at in that process overall. So Jen, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Stone from the Economic Development team with the District of Squamish. I've been working with the sustainability team on creating this roadmap for a circular economy, and I'm really excited and heartened to see the number of people interested in attending today. It's really motivating. The rationale for undertaking, yes.
Sorry, could you turn your camera on?
Oh, sorry, is it not on? I thought I had turned it on already. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's see how this goes. Am I on now? Can you see me?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. The rationale for undertaking the work today has been well defined by Mayor Elliott, Kate, and Ian. And so I won't go into the detail on the alignment with the district goals and priorities, other than to say that the roadmap aligns with our official community plan, with the goals as you can see on the screen, as they relate to resilience, livability, health, connectedness, engagement, and climate. It supports economic prosperity in the region while delivering additional environmental and social benefits to the community. And as Paul outlined, the roadmap aligns with global, national, provincial, and regional trends. Next slide, please. As already touched upon by Tima, the benefits of creating a circular economy are vast and diverse. The benefits from a societal and government perspective include reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigating climate change, maximising the use from resources and materials, and creating resilient jobs and attracting investment. Companies benefit from things such as new locally based revenue generating opportunities, for example, through the sale of waste product, as mentioned by Tima, strengthening relationships and brand, and mitigating supply chain, which seems particularly pertinent today, not only due to the pressures created by COVID, but also the more recent flooding. The benefits of creating a circular economy for the local community include increased disposable income, encouraging innovation and a rich local economy, creating diverse employment opportunities, and alleviating social inequities, such as food insecurity. I'm sure, as you'll appreciate, this is not an exhaustive list. Next slide, please. The roadmap itself is a working document. It's outlining a methodology for initiating a circular economy in Squamish. We plan to update it and improve it as we discover more about circularity, as we develop the actionable concepts and learn more from each implementation. The roadmap at this point is really in its infancy, and that's why we're taking this time to engage and get feedback on the community's appetite for the work, the general direction that we're proposing, and to understand more about the community's priorities and goals as they relate to creating circular Squamish. The creation of a circular economy requires cooperation and collaboration across sectors and stakeholder groups. It requires systemic change, a change in thinking, a change in terms of what defines success, and a change in terms of considering what is possible. It's complex. The goal of the roadmap is to simplify and remove some of the complexity, to provide some structure and process, and create a stepped approach. It aims to guide the community to enable that transition and realise the change. Despite the fact that circularity already exists locally in many forms, the intention of the roadmap is to add structure to the efforts so that we can, as a community, leverage, harness, enhance, and recognise the benefits of the collective effort towards circularity. Next slide, please. To guide the work, we elected to use a framework that's actually a combination of existing frameworks. The core elements that you see come from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Key Elements framework, and the 4 key drivers are from the closed loop partners as presented by Paul. The core elements in the framework are stretching the lifetime, using waste as a resource, and prioritising regenerative resources. These 3 core elements really focus on the physical flows and will direct our work when it comes to piloting programs and initiatives within the thematic areas that we choose to pursue. To give you an idea of how this might work in practice, let's take food as a potential thematic area. Considering the framework, we might ask, how can we prioritise regenerative resources? And then determine that an associated goal might be to source food that's grown regeneratively. Similarly, another goal might be to create maximum utility from organic waste, aligning with use waste as a resource. These are really very simplistic examples, but I hope that it conveys the way that the framework creates a focus on these 3 core elements that are essential to the creation of a circular economy. Within the framework, the 4 key drivers across the bottom help us to determine what the foundational work needs to be to support the overall circular economy goals and initiatives. Next slide, please. The roadmap's divided into 2 distinct focus areas. Focus area 1 will set the foundations for circularity, creating clear direction and support systems to ensure the success of the collective efforts long term. The 4 key drivers, as presented by Paul in somewhat more detail, are attracting investment, innovation, partnerships and collaborations, and policy. The purpose of this foundational work is really to identify actions and areas that will have impact across a variety of initiatives and that will elevate the collective impact. Next slide, please. Focus area 2 is the investigation into 3 key thematic areas from which the initiatives will be launched. The 3 thematic areas identified are food, textiles, and the built environment. I'm not going to delve into these areas at this stage, as after the break, Jeff Wint from Sustainability will elaborate on why we've elected to focus on these themes. And as Ian outlined earlier, we have some initial priority actions and activities already underway. This second focus area is really where the action is. This is where we implement the initiatives. But prior to this, we need to do our due diligence to ensure that the projects that we pursue have the best chance of success and the highest possible impact. The investigative work is planned for 2022, and it's proposed the associated initiatives will be rolled out in 2023 and ongoing. This is where I conclude my presentation today, but if you have questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Paul for our first breakout session. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I'm sure questions will start to arise, and some of those will be brought up in the breakouts. There's a comment here, I think that's a very valid point, to say focus area 1 must include awareness building in the community. And I think it's fair to say that within that collaboration partnerships piece, information awareness building is part of that, but maybe necessary to call it out.
I would totally agree with that. One of my background is in marketing, and one of the key areas that I think in terms of delivering successful change is, although this initiative is really directed toward the business community, we need to elevate that message across the resident community as well, so that they can also support the efforts that are being made in this regard, recognise and support them.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So why don't we get people involved in rolling up their sleeves a little bit here as part of the breakouts as a next step. Thank you, Jen, for that overview. And we're going to go in a bit more detail in part 2 on the roadmap after the break. But for now, the breakouts, I'm just going to speak a little bit to the focus here before we send you off. We are really focused on this first one at the high level. So thinking about your input on the draft roadmap and how it outlines with the ideal outcomes for the community. What are we looking to achieve here, and your input there. So if you can go to, perfect, the rules of engagement before we head off into our group, just a bit of housekeeping. So please participate, bring your ideas and insights to the group. It'll be a bit of an exciting experiment around virtual collaboration. So we'll be using a combination of chat box and open conversation, as well as the Miro board. A Miro board in terms of the ability to sort of share firsthand as part of the discussion. So if you're not familiar with Miro, it's a virtual whiteboard tool that provides everybody with a front row seat for engaging as part of the breakout discussions. And in each room, there'll be a breakout facilitator that'll walk you through some simple Miro instructions before we dive in. It might feel a little bit chaotic just at the beginning, but that's okay. The facilitators are going to help guide that process throughout. And we just ask that you be respectful in terms of the ideas and opinions of others, that you share openly, but we'll follow Chatham House rules. So that's where you can use the information that you've learned throughout the session, but please don't attribute them to individuals or their organizations. And just a note, we'll be putting together a summary from the plenary and breakout conversations here to share back with participants afterwards. So maybe with that, I invite the Globe team to send us off to our rooms. Thanks very much. Enjoy the conversation. You can turn your cameras and microphones on now for this part.
Hi, if there's someone.
I have a problem because they are shutting down the cameras, even though they were asking us to do it, to put it on. So do you know if like you're in communication with the host, what are they blocking this?
I can see you.
You can see me?
I can. Well,
I can see your name.
No, you cannot now.
I can see you now, yes.
Thank you. That somebody was blocking me.
I thought it was someone else speaking.
I have to send messages to all the hosts.
I am being blocked.
Yeah, I'm being blocked. You cannot start your video because host has stopped it, is what the message says.
Yes.
And I was in the breakout room, but then it closed. The closed right away, so I'm back here.
Okay. Just hang tight for a minute. They're just assigning.
Yeah,
folks to the
apologies,
breakout room.
everybody. Let me just, okay. Everybody should be
There we
in
go.
their
So that's
breakout
good.
rooms.
Why don't we come back at 10:35 if that works, Victoria?
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Victoria, are we in our breakout rooms? Because I don't think we are.
Okay, 1 second.
No, we're not, because
No,
we
there's a
haven't
few
been asked
people
to
that
join
are.
a breakout room.
We're not, and the camera still won't come on.
Okay, 1 second, everybody. I apologize why you guys are not going into your breakout rooms. You should have had a thing come up that said, do you want to join your room?
No, we haven't yet.
No, have not.
Okay, so I'm going to have to assign everybody. Just give me a minute. The wonderful world of technology.
Some challenges. Some are having challenges with Miro. So we'll work with a hybrid approach for the second breakout. We thank you for staying with us and giving your input. And I'll talk through that before we jump into our next breakout. But I'm really excited about this second half because we're going to hear from local businesses next, a couple sort of Pecha Kucha style presentations, and then a bit of a deeper dive hearing from the team at Squamish in terms of the roadmap and the sectors in focus. But before we do that, I want to invite everybody just to complete these 2 questions on the polling screen. And you'll note, again, there's 2 questions there. You got to scroll down to the second one. You should see it on your screen, and we'll share the results of those polls in a little bit. But the 2 questions being, what are the top benefits you see for Squamish from embracing a circular economy strategy and various initiatives? So pick up to 3 that you think are the top benefits in your mind. And then secondly, what are the top things we need to focus on to advance the circular economy in the near term? So pick 3 that you think are the most important there, and we'll share those back with the group afterwards. And so without further ado, I'd like to invite Zosia Brown, who's the Vice President of Sustainability at Nexii, to share a bit of an overview of Nexii's focus on circular economy as a core principle to their business and their operations. So thank you, Zosia, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to join this roadmap workshop. It's really exciting to be here, and I will dive straight into slides if that's okay. So as Paul mentioned, I'm Zosia Brown. I'm the VP Sustainability with Nexii. I'm going to provide a little bit of an introduction to who we are as a company and then share a story of a circular economy project we've had the opportunity to pursue here in Squamish. Next slide. Nexii is a green building construction company. We are based here in Squamish, as well as Moose Jaw, with a headquarters in Vancouver. And we design and manufacture high-performance buildings and green building products that are sustainable, cost-efficient, and resilient in the face of climate change. Our mission is to build a vibrant future for people and planet. Next slide. Using a breakthrough proprietary building material that we call Nexii, which behaves very similar to concrete but contains no Portland cement, we're able to design high-performance envelope panels for a range of applications and building typologies, from commercial to multi-story to industrial and even residential. And Nexii products allow us to significantly reduce end-to-end carbon emissions. Next slide. And here we are in Squamish. So this is our 85,000 square foot plant on Government Road. We opened up in April and we've been ramping up production since then. We employ around 80 staff and contractors, and that's split between our manufacturing plant and our next door R&D facility. And on the top right hand side there, you can get a sneak peek of some of the panels we're currently very focused on producing for a Marriott hotel over in Nanaimo on the island. Next slide. And why are we here? Well, I just wanted to zoom out and just ask that kind of fundamental question about our purpose. And obviously climate change is upon us. We're living in a climate emergency, and we know that natural disasters will continue to intensify. And from the latest IPCC report, 1.5 degrees of warming is now likely by early 2030s. As Ian mentioned earlier this morning in the intro from Squamish, there are two numbers that we really need to bear in mind if we want to avert the worst of climate disasters coming our way, and those are half our global emissions by 2030 and get to net zero by 2050. Next slide. And so what many people don't realize, that buildings and the construction industry are responsible for 39% of global energy-related GHG emissions. It's a huge number, and much of this is down to how we heat and cool our buildings, that operational carbon component, as well as the emissions tied up in the materials we select, so the embodied carbon component, and then of course construction-related emissions and waste from demolition. Next slide. This number has been ticking up by around 1% per year since 2010. And because we continue to see trends in urbanization, the volume of buildings on Earth is expected to double by 2060. That's a lot of new construction, and buildings have staying power. So once you build them, they chug away at resources for 50 years, 75 years or longer. It's absolutely essential to design new buildings right and tackle our existing building stock at the same time with low carbon solutions that scale. Next slide. And we've made a lot of great progress in building energy efficiency, building electrification, and providing that electricity from renewable sources, such as solar and wind. The other big piece of the puzzle is embodied carbon, which is carbon associated with extracting materials, manufacturing materials, bringing them to site, assembling construction, the construction process, the buildings themselves, and the end of life scenario for the buildings. Between now and 2050, that embodied carbon piece tied up in the materials will represent 50% of building related GHG emissions. Next slide. And of course, there's construction waste as well. The construction industry is the world's largest contributor to solid waste globally. In some countries, it fills up to 33 to 50% of landfills. Why do we have waste in the construction industry? It's because the design life cycle of our buildings tends to be notoriously short, and also the wasteful nature of on-site assembly. As you can see here, this is a demolition project. Next slide. And so Nexii is carefully aligning ourselves to tackle multiple of these challenges at once. What I'm sharing here is a photo of our Starbucks building we built in Abbotsford, BC earlier this year. Nexii provided the structural solution, walls and roof. We achieved 20% less embodied carbon in our product, 43% reduction in GHG from the operational energy, and assembled this building in 6 days with near zero on-site construction waste. Next slide. So now I'd like to share a circular economy case study. And what do we mean by circular economy as it relates to buildings? Primarily, it's about that product life extension. It's about maintaining materials in the economy for longer, or really embodied carbon in that piece of buildings. Next slide. So we measure embodied carbon through whole building or building product life cycle assessment. And we can look at several different boundaries for that LCA. Cradle to gate is extraction to basically building the building. Cradle to grave is extraction of materials through to the end of life, which is typically demolition still. And cradle to cradle is all the way through to new life or reuse or deep energy retrofit, for example. There are circular economy approaches in each one of these stages, but our focus today and the focus of my story is on cradle to cradle. Next slide. So we had the chance earlier this year to embrace a circular economy approach with our buildings. This is a photo of our Discovery Center, what we called our Discovery Center, basically a sales office for Nexii. It was located on 3rd and Winnipeg in Squamish, built in 2019, one of our early prototypes. And so it's been through 2 years of weathering, 700 square foot building, and the lease came up on the land. So because our panels are designed to be incredibly durable and resilient, we felt this was a great opportunity for a disassembly, reassembly case study. Next slide. We found a buyer for the building who wanted to reassemble the unit as a coach house on Salt Spring Island. And so in August, we assembled a disassembly team working with Lighthouse UEC to document the project and consulting with Jeff Went and the waste team at Squamish as well. And generally just a lot of excitement about this proof of concept. There is a growing community of deconstruction companies such as Unbuilders that Paul touched on earlier. That still represents only 1% of building end of life scenarios. And as far as we know, there's no other panelized construction companies designing for disassembly. Next slide. So after a day of prep work, removing the interior wall studs, we started with the roof. Nexii buildings are bolted together in place. That means they come together, they're assembled very quickly on site, and they're just as easy to disassemble. Our contractor kept a close track and labeled all of the materials as they were coming out of the building. Next slide. And in the next, you can see here a bird's eye view of the building with the roof off. What we have is a flatbed truck transporting the panels to our R&D facility, and a crane that was involved with lifting and maneuvering the panels, and strikingly no trash dumpster. A very clean site, and that allows us to minimize our impact on the community. Next slide. After the roof, we moved on to walls, which took another 2 days, followed by a day for the floor panels. So 6 days in total to disassemble this building. And the process with Nexii panels requires kind of a completely different skill set than demolition. It's less physical for the staff, it's cleaner and safer. And this entire process of disassembling our laneway house or our Discovery Center was completed by a crew of 6 members, plus a crane operator. Next slide. We worked with an LCA consultant to track the embodied carbon savings from the building reuse. So if we look at those cradle to cradle boundaries, Nexii building disassembled for reuse has 63% and 70% lower embodied carbon impact than wood or steel stud designs that would have been demolished. And this is even factoring in typical recycling rates for construction materials in Squamish. Next slide. We brought all the materials to our R&D facility, and happy to share that we achieved 95% diversion from landfill. So those 2 orange buckets that you see in the bottom right-hand corner is, plus the black one next to them, is literally all of the trash that was generated from the disassembly. Everything else is either being recycled, or the bulk majority of it is going to be reused in the reassembly project this coming year. Next slide. And just to share that this project, this circular economy case study, really aligns with Nexii's own long-term positive impacts. We're all about very much focused on reinventing how the world builds. It's a very different product and approach to construction than we've been doing for the last 50 years, 100 years. We're very much focused on eliminating waste as well in construction, and it's an active focus in our plants. And then driving low carbon growth, creating new skills and clean tech jobs in the process. And final slide, just to wrap up, I'll leave this question up here around why are we here, if not to make the world better off. So thanks so much for the opportunity to share our story with you today, and really pleased to be a part of the roadmap process. If you have any questions, I do see a couple in the chat. And so I can either answer those now or just via chat, depending on the timeline.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think that would be great if you don't mind responding in the chat. Everybody can, and there may be a few more that come in as people sort of reflect on what you've shared. And that's amazing to sort of see both the input side, what you're doing with the materials, and, you know, on the deconstruction side, and the 95% diversion is a very impressive target that you've met there. So thank you for that. I see some questions around materials and water, for example, in the chat. So maybe you can speak to those. That would be terrific. Thank you for taking the time to share your story. And I'm sure it's not the last we'll be hearing from you. I'd like to invite Mariana Borsic-Guts from the Squamish Food Bank and Under One Roof to share a different story within the community here that has a linkage to circular economy as well. Mariana, over to you.
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Paul. Oh, not in the frame there.
There you go.
Folks. Yeah, happy to be here and excited to chat about the way that we're trying to integrate some circular economy work into food security in the Squamish community. I can jump right into the slide deck there. Awesome. So yeah, I should have introduced myself a moment ago. So my name is Mariana Borsic-Guts. I'm the program manager of the Squamish Food Bank and coordinate the Food Hub program at Under One Roof. So first, just a quick background into Under One Roof and the work that we do. Essentially, Under One Roof is a social service organization within the Squamish community that was born out of the collaboration between the Squamish Food Bank and Squamish Helping Hands. Squamish Helping Hands is a longtime social service agency that's been based in Squamish, focusing on addictions, mental health, and housing in the community. And the Squamish Food Bank, of course, has been predominantly focused on food security and providing food access to the Squamish folks. So we came together just over a year ago, and in that union created Under One Roof, a place where folks can access any services that they might need in a single location, and also have kind of pivoted the way that we do food access to kind of move away from that typical narrative of food banking and charity and poverty, and more towards a more dignified and empowering means of providing food access to community. Under One Roof itself, I'll just speak briefly, does several kind of projects around community work, and also I guess that would include this kind of circular economy piece. We also have a laundry room that we're trying to create low barrier, high access spaces for. We also do a recycle bicycle program where we take in old bikes and put them, fix them up, send them out. But I'll be focusing primarily on the food side, as that's kind of where my expertise sits. Next slide, please. Amazing. So I have a couple of numbers here that I'll go into in more detail, but I'll give you just an overview of our food hub. So that includes our market and our community kitchen. So our market is what is kind of traditionally, we kind of like to call it our community facing food access space, but it's sort of what the food bank has transformed into. Essentially, it's a pay what you feel kind of grocery store like space where people are welcome to come in and shop for what they need and take off. There are no barriers to access. There's no eligibility criteria. No one needs to show an ID. Nobody needs to make a donation. It's very much kind of a place where anyone, everyone are welcome to come and buy or like take food from the food that we have. We are kind of intending that by including anyone, we are making sure to include everyone. So there's no need for people to kind of define themselves in this way, like, oh, am I a person who uses a food bank? Am I a person who should access a social service? Do I deserve this? Am I in enough need? We're kind of trying to break all of that down and create a place where anyone can come and everyone is welcome and can belong. Our community kitchen, similar work. We prepare hot meals twice a day, so lunch and dinner, and again, serve that to the community, anyone who wants to stop by to grab food to take out, as well as to eat in here in our space. And alongside our kind of ongoing hot meal service, we also have several programs, including school breakfast and lunch, where we send food to schools for lunch and breakfast for their students, as well as Meals on Wheels, a hamper delivery program, et cetera, et cetera. So many kind of different avenues of creating food access in a low barrier and non-judgmental way for our community. Just briefly to run through this slide, on average, so took an average over the last 3 months, we see just over 1,000 visits to our market in a month. We see that's kind of spread over just under 350 individual folks who come and access space in a month. Once again, our hamper delivery program, we feed on average 200 people every month with those food deliveries. So folks that can't come down to the space because of physical limitations, barriers, disabilities, what have you. We do kind of food delivery to them. So 200 individuals, give or take. About 2,300 meals are served in an average month out of our community kitchen, and just under 4,000 breakfast and lunch kits are distributed to local schools for folks in an average month. Next slide, please. And so the heart and soul of our work and the circular economy tie-in to the work that we do is, of course, our food recovery program. So we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do, and we wouldn't be able to create the access that we've been able to create if it weren't for the way that we recover and rescue and repurpose food from local community vendors. So we work with several folks in Squamish. Massive corporations such as Walmart donate to us, and also local little vendors and bakeries such as Sunflower Bakery and Tall Tree Bakery, and of course Save On Foods and Nestor's Market in Squamish are two of our largest donors. So we have a daily program where we drive around to these different places depending on the day, and we'll rescue bread, produce, dairy, meat, non-perishable food, kind of anything that they have now considered surplus and in a normal model would now be reaching the end of its life and diverting to landfill, essentially. So we go around, we pick up this food that is often prepared for us to a certain extent, and then we'll bring it back here and sort it and redirect it. Essentially, the kind of model we try to uphold is to bring food to its best and highest purpose. So the kitchen will come through, they'll take things that are close to the ends of their lives for immediate kind of repurposing, and they'll integrate that into those meals that we serve daily. And everything else will then directly go into our market. And then our market is open 6 days a week for anyone to come and grab unlimited produce and bread and dairy and things that they need that day. We try hard not to create limits around that. Of course, there's kind of like some built-in limits to what's a reasonable amount for folks to take, but we do really try to encourage that people take this food because we want to move it. We want to get it out the door, and we want it to get into the hands and the bellies of the folks that are going to need it and going to continue to give it life. So once again, kind of running through some average statistics. So we rescue just under 30,000 pounds of food every month from all of these local vendors. Every last pound of that would be going directly into a landfill if we weren't there to intervene there. So we bring that food back, and then just under 3,000, so just under 10% of the food that we rescue goes into our kitchen, then gets repurposed immediately into meals and into hands and bellies. And then the rest of that, so just about 90% of the food that we rescue monthly will go and be diverted into our market, which then community accesses as needed. So overall, the food that we're able to distribute to the community, of that 30,000 pounds is just over 26,000 pounds. So just about 90% of the food that we rescue that would have been thrown away, we actually get out into the community, and we find that we only have around a 10% loss rate. And even that isn't mostly lost because we're composting the majority of what we get. And if we're not able to, well, actually, so we're diverting to pig farmers and local farmers who then feed that and the food to their animals, and then everything we're not able to divert to the farmers, then we compost. So it's like, you know, largely speaking, a very small loss rate. Yeah, and we're really proud of the fact that we're able to take so much food that is on its way out and continue to bring it life in the context of food access and food security. Yeah, it just makes so much sense, and it's something that we're really working on growing. I will note, you know, we are very much at the end of the food distribution supply chain, and there are a lot of opportunities for recapturing and repurposing food loss and food waste and surplus food throughout that chain. However, on a local level, this is a really important place for us. I mentioned briefly that Pemberton, you know, their kind of strength lies in agriculture, and there is so much opportunity for us to address food waste on that level in a space like that. And I think that this is a really important initiative for different communities to become empowered to embrace. And it will look a little bit different in every place, but for the time being, we are working on perfecting it in the Squamish context. And we're really proud of the community that we've built at the market, where people can come and feel dignified and empowered in the way that they access their food, while simultaneously contributing to climate justice and social justice. You can go to the last slide there. Just briefly, so we are predominantly a food access organization, and we've been able to recognize and capitalize the value of imbuing a circular food economy into the work that we do and the practice that we do as a path towards climate and food justice for our communities and for all.
Thank you, Mariana. That's a wonderful story, and a 10% food loss rate is something to be very proud of. A real win-win-win across many different angles, from social, the economic, and the environmental side. So thank you. A lot of kudos in the chat box for you as well, and a couple of questions. So if you don't mind responding, and others can share additional comments or questions for Mariana in the chat box, and hopefully she can reply to some of those there. Thank you again. And I'd like to bring back the polling results that we hosted just before the presentations. Just to wrap up, to say that, you know, those are just 2 stories, and hopefully we'll see many more of these sorts of stories start to scale up. There's already other examples, but the roadmap is really designed to support businesses and organizations of all types. So a big split between the top benefits, but obviously it shows that there's a real variety of opportunity here with circular economy, from environmental, social, or economic. And scrolling down, I think the top pick here is about supporting infrastructure, policies, and growing awareness and sharing information about the opportunities. So thank you for those that responded to our poll. Fantastic. So let's go a little bit deeper on the roadmap for the next 10 minutes or so. We're going to hear from Ian, and who we heard from previously, Ian, the Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change at District of Squamish, and Jeff Wint, who's the Outreach Sustainability Coordinator at Squamish, who will give a bit more background on the Circular Economy Roadmap framework and the focus areas and how those were selected. So maybe over to you guys to give a bit more insight here.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm Jeff Wint, I'm the Sustainability Coordinator here at the District of Squamish, and I'm going to be joined by Ian Pickett, who you heard from earlier. He's our Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change. Next slide, please. So the circular economy is obviously really broad. So we've, as Jen mentioned, we've got a few key areas to focus on where we want to begin our work. There's a number of methods that we use to determine what those thematic areas are, but broadly we wanted to make sure that we chose areas that are aligned with our existing community plans and goals. So the principles of the circular economy align with Council strategic plan, which also includes a directive to act now on climate change to create positive local and global impacts. Circularity is also reflected in the district's official community plan and community climate action plan, zero waste plan, and economic development's identification of the green economy as a growth sector. So each of the themes that we've chosen speak to these plans and objectives. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So our three initial areas of focus are going to be the built environment, food, organics, and food systems. And both of those we've already spoken to a little bit here today, as well as textiles. So we're going to take a dive into each of these themes and talk really about the opportunities that we see in them, discuss some of the work that we've already got in progress and why we selected those. So Ian's going to take over and he's going to discuss a little bit on the built environment and those opportunities.
Great, thanks so much, Jeff. So as Zosha explained very well, buildings are a huge source of emissions. They are 30% of our community GHG emissions in Squamish. However, that does not include the embodied emissions associated with them. So in a typical building, embodied emissions are about 25% of total life cycle emissions. However, as our buildings get more and more efficient, embodied emissions are getting proportionately larger. So a building built today to step 4 of our energy step code is close to 50% of overall life cycle emissions and will soon surpass it. So there are a number of reasons why the built environment and circularity is really important to tackle right now. One is that embodied emissions are now emissions, so they're mostly in the atmosphere by the time a building is constructed. This is really important given the urgency of 2030 targets. Also, as Squamish is growing so rapidly, there is a huge opportunity for us to take action on this. There's a lot of buildings being created, a lot of emissions happening right now. And finally, I firmly agree that embodied carbon can be a good news story. Sorry, if you can just go back. So there are many ways to reduce emissions, and there are even very viable emissions negative technologies out there. So a lot of climate action, a lot of climate change is pretty doom and gloom, to be frank, but embodied carbon could be really positive, and there's a lot of things that we can do. So the image that you see in front of you is a depiction of the sources of emissions during a building life cycle. So everything from material extraction, processing, transportation, construction, as well as end-of-life activities. So there are a couple things that I think are important to stress. One of this is, just like waste, there is a hierarchy to embodied carbon. So before we think about our materials, although that's very important, higher up, we want to think about how we can extend the life of an existing building, or if it's appropriate to build a building that can be smaller, and how do we maximize material efficiencies. Another important comment is that concrete is a very large source of embodied emissions, and within concrete, it comes down to essentially cement. So concrete is often up to 50% of the embodied carbon of a building. Also, wood can be very good for embodied carbon. However, the carbon sequestration of wood is really hard to quantify, and it all comes down to end of life. What happens to that wood after the building so whether or not that sequestered carbon can be counted, it gets nullified if it goes into a landfill. However, it carries on if it is reused. Next slide, please. So here are just a few images that Jeff Wint has taken that help to remind us that we have a ways to go still. We still need to get better. However, there are a lot of people in Squamish who are leading the way to getting better, and many of you are on this call. Our new deconstruction bylaw, I believe, is a small step in the right direction. Next slide, please. So some long-term objectives that we're using to guide us in Squamish. We must reduce all of our building emissions, also reduce waste and increase local jobs in the meantime. There are embodied emissions associated with new buildings and renovations. It's quite easy to overlook or forget the renovation component. And circularity needs to be thought of right from the start. We have to design for deconstruction. And I believe that the Nexii presentation showed that very well, how you can design a building with deconstruction in mind. Finally, One good news story is that Squamish, in collaboration with Whistler and Squamish Nation, has received substantial funding as part of the Game Changer grant project from the Community Energy Association. So over the next 2 years, we are engaged in a pretty detailed study that's going to involve a lot of research and modeling in Squamish and Whistler and Squamish Nation communities to understand and quantify embodied emissions. And we're going to look at different actions that we can take as a community to reduce embodied emissions, be they policy and regulation, removing barriers, providing incentives, and also education and capacity building. And then finally, we're going to use that information to create a guidebook that will hopefully be a valuable resource for other communities throughout BC. Thank you very much. I'll pass it back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Ian. So our next theme that we're going to be focusing on is textiles. So this is an area where we don't have as much data as some of our other focus areas. And as we saw Tima mention earlier today, that data is really important. We also recognize the challenges around the global nature of textiles. There was a comment earlier from Dr. Valaders in the chat that said awareness should be one of our key focuses. And we see this textiles piece really as our vehicle to build that awareness. Textiles is something that everyone I've seen with their camera on today has been involved in. Everyone in Squamish is somehow involved in a textiles, so they have the opportunity to be involved in that textile circular economy. Textiles right now, it represents about 6% of our residential waste sitting in our landfill. And when our donation bins have been removed over the past few years, we heard quite a bit of outcry from the community. So that tells us that not only is there that opportunity for every resident to be involved in the textile circular economy, but there's also really that desire. People really don't want to be putting clothing in the landfill. They see that there's still value in that and they want to be involved. When we look a little bit deeper about some of the opportunities and what's already happening here in Squamish, we see that there is some reuse and repair already going on in our community. We know that there's some secondhand stores, some consignment stores. We know that there's a really thriving online marketplace, particularly for infant and children's clothing. There's community reuse events and repair events, as well as some repair stores throughout town. A lot of this has largely evolved without the involvement of the district and has been really community driven and community-led initiatives. So we see the opportunity here to really highlight and promote that growth of the circular textiles environment. And really, as I said, to use it as a demonstration for all residents. We see it as an opportunity for everyone to get involved in the circular economy, understand the language, understand what it means, so that it isn't as frightening when we start talking about things like Ian was mentioning in built environment. We also see it as an opportunity to create skills for people, because that's really what's going to get people involved in the textile circular economy. Next slide, please. So our objectives with textiles is to reduce that textile waste to landfill, so that 6%, increase access to textile repair and recycling, and then also really to create that awareness and participation in textile reuse and repair, and try to expand that to a greater understanding of the circular economy. Next slide, please. So our third focus area is on food waste and food systems. So again, this is something that everyone in Squamish and the Sea to Sky region is involved with. Everyone's consuming food or buying food, taking some food from under one roof, as Mariana mentioned earlier. Every community member is already being asked to divert organic waste from the landfill to make compost. So we already have some of that starting of a circular economy there. We have a really strong community involvement in this area, as well as some action. And there's a number of people on the call here today that are involved in different parts of that. And there's also quite a bit of support from a number of levels of government. Next slide, please. So locally, food waste is a major focus of our community climate action plan. That first big move, if you recall back to Ian's first presentation, was to close the loop on waste. It's also one of the major priorities of our zero waste plan. So since 2017, we've required all residential, multifamily, and commercial properties in Squamish to divert their organic waste. The provincial government is also helping out through the Clean BC program, and they're shifting their focus on food waste really to a circularity kind of model. And they've got some funding opportunities for new infrastructure across the province, which is going to be really important. So this is a piece to demonstrate how any Squamish business or Sea to Sky business looking to be involved in food circularity has funding and support available. So we have seen some significant uptake from our diversion program so far. So there's over 2,100 tons per year that are being diverted from residential sources. We have over 600 tons being diverted from commercial sources, as well as the 125 tons that Under One Roof is able to recover on an annual basis. But we still have opportunity for a lot more, as you can see on the screen here. This is from our 2020 waste composition report. About 30% of the material going into our landfill is organic material. And quite a bit of this is edible food waste. So what we see on the right-hand side of the screen shows that, from single family housing, it's about 10%, from multifamily housing, 16%, from commercial sources, 15%. That's avoidable food waste. So that's food waste that could be diverted to a program like Mariana's, or just reduced through different shopping, through portion control, or better storage. The Sea to Sky food recovery strategy, which was commissioned by the Resort Municipality of Whistler, is an action plan that is not only going to help us increase the amount of recovered food in the region, but also to create better systems to get that food to where it needs to go. We see that action plan as a really key step towards circular food systems. Now, a lot of these opportunities I've talked about, what's going into the landfill, how we can divert that, that's really just those end of the pipe solutions. As Tima mentioned earlier on at the beginning of the day, there's quite a few loops that we can look at towards the creation of food or the creation of materials. And we recognize that there is opportunity there as well. Next slide, please. So our objectives with food waste, we want to be reducing food waste to landfill. That's wasted food and food scraps. We want to be reducing the avoidable food waste to compost. We want to be increasing the circular and regenerative farming opportunities in Squamish and the Sea to Sky region. And then we also want to increase food security and build those resilient food systems. As we've seen over the last couple of weeks, our food systems can be subject to climate change and natural disaster. And as we can increase the circularity of our food systems, we can build those resilient food systems that we need. Next slide, please. So those three that I've discussed, those are our proposed initial focus areas. We have some other focus areas that we'll be looking at through in the future. And all of these meet parts of our strategic goals and plans. And like I said, we're hoping to address them in the future. So they include things like energy, forest waste. Our landfill will be going through an expansion project. We really hope to build circularity into that, as well as some for the District of Squamish inward focused things like procurement and municipal facilities. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to Paul.
Perfect. Thanks for the overview, Jeff and Ian, and good to hear a bit of the rationale there behind the current state of the roadmap, but to hear there's also opportunities to go into some other areas in the future. So we've got about half an hour here for the second breakout. My suggestion is for the facilitators that as we get into the breakouts, we sort of combine question 1 and question 2 together and go right to question 2, which is really looking at the key actions that we think we want to prioritize over the next 12 to 24 months. I know there is some mixed results using Miro for some in the last breakout. So would suggest that the facilitators here support with the Miro in terms of helping to add sticky notes as we go through it to the board. And group 1 will join my group 2. So Kate and your group there, which is a bit smaller, we'll have you join ours. It just takes a minute there while we move you over, but we'll have a robust discussion there. Victoria, we'll wrap up at 11:55 in terms of the breakouts and bring people back just for some final sort of wrap up and next step points. And with that, I think we're good to go. Thanks, everyone. Squamish with and was delighted to sort of get a range of perspectives, both sector-specific areas like construction and food and textiles, as well as sort of some overarching underlying foundational pieces and key actions over the next maybe 12 to 24 months. So again, thank you for those that were able to contribute to that discussion. And really, maybe I'll turn it over to Kate now as we sort of wrap things up over the next few minutes, just to sort of speak to briefly to next steps.
All right, thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for participating. We are going to be taking the roadmap and taking the input that we heard today. We're going to generate a very short, succinct summary of the event and what we heard. And we're going to be looking at that in context of the roadmap that's been developed to date and making sure that we continue to strengthen this working document as we proceed. We're going to be in 2022 diving into those thematic areas in greater detail and undertaking some research to better understand and develop and prioritize the actions that are going to be required to move the needle with regards to circularity in Squamish. And we're hopeful to work with all of you. So we've got, participants that are, from our academic institution partners, from other levels of government, from business, our not-for-profit community, and this is only the start of the conversation. And we continue to work to socialize the idea of circularity in Squamish with our sustainability team and the rest of the district. And we're hopeful that you can help bring forward the message as well around the opportunity that the circular economy represents in Squamish and beyond. So that's where we're going. We'd love to hear from you. I think, Paul, there is an exit survey, and we'll get that out to you, and then you'll be hearing from us very soon.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, I was just going to say, hopefully we can do some of these in person next time, because as we know, virtual workshops can create some technical issues along the way, but certainly some great insights hear from everybody. I just want to really quickly thank the speakers, the presenters, the facilitators, all the volunteers that helped out today. Thank all the participants, obviously, for coming ready to engage and sticking with us to the end. That was a 3-hour session, so thank you very much. Keep an eye open for that summary document that Kate mentioned will be coming. And I just invite you to take the last 2 minutes, since we're wrapping up a tiny bit ahead of schedule, to click on the survey link that you see in the chat box here. And there's 2 questions basically about how we'd like to continue the conversation with you. If you can do that, very much appreciated. And I wish you a good rest of your week here, Friday, and enjoy your weekend.
And thank you so much, Paul, for agreeing to facilitate and work with the District of Squamish on this project. We're really, really fortunate to have you on board.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.